on the commercial. Here we go. Focused on the commercial real estate and development sector of our regional economy. So I first want to thank our sponsors for this event. We have our presenting sponsor, Business Health Trust, and then our event sponsor, Advanced Professionals Insurance and Benefit Solutions. We have Shannon here from Advanced Professionals Insurance to share a few remarks with us. So Shannon, if you want to pop on.
Thanks, Lee. Like she said, my name is Shannon, and I'm the Training and Events Manager for Advanced Professionals Insurance and Benefit Solutions, which is the wholesale benefits division of ABD Insurance and Financial Services. And we actually just changed our name to Newfront. So that's new as of a couple of weeks ago. We help trade groups and other associations such as the Seattle Chamber provide health insurance and other employee benefits to small and mid-sized companies throughout the state. So as a sponsor, I'm here representing the Seattle Chamber's program, the Business Health Trust, which offers medical, dental, vision, and life insurance to chamber members. And because we negotiate those benefits at a wholesale level, you could think of that like a Costco model. We're able to offer businesses with between 2 to 199 employees with the kinds of prices and insurance plans that are more comparable with what larger companies have access to. So this gives our region's smaller companies additional negotiating power when they're trying to hire in our competitive job market. Again, my name is Shannon Spencer, and I'm the Training and Events Manager for Advanced Professionals, and here representing the Business Health Trust, which offers employee benefits to small and mid-sized companies. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you again to our sponsors. We appreciate their support. So now I have just a few logistics to chat through. We're all Zoom experts by this point, but I want to share anyway. If you need any help during the webinar, myself and my colleague Betsy are both on, and if you use the chat box, send us any questions and we can help you out. However, if you have any questions for our speakers, I'd ask you to use the Q&A box instead. That way, all the questions are in one place. It's easy for our moderator, Nancy, to see them and work through them, and we don't miss any. So please put any questions over in the Q&A box. Next slide, please. I am just about to turn on the live transcript for this event. If you don't want to see that or you want to make any adjustments to how you're viewing it, you can use the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and make any adjustments there on the closed captioning. And as you heard at the start, this webinar is being recorded, and I'll put it on the event page later today, and I will share it in our post-event email. So with that, I am going to introduce our moderator and we can get started. So Nancy Bainbridge Rogers is the chair of the Land Use Practice Group at Carencross and Hempelman, where she works with real estate developers and landowners to get projects permitted and built. She has decades of experience working with regulators and is a skilled negotiator with local government officials. Her work includes real estate development projects in downtown Seattle, city neighborhoods, and surrounding suburbs and counties throughout the Puget Sound region. She's also deeply involved with many organizations, including the Urban Land Institute and Master Builders Association, and she is president-elect for the NAIOP Washington State Chapter and serves on the board of the Washington Business Properties Association. She's regularly invited to speak on a range of topics related to the commercial real estate industry, so I'm excited to have her with us at our event today to guide this conversation. So Nancy, I invite you to turn on your video and unmute and get us started.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Lee. And good morning to all of our audience members. We are here today to talk about something that's all near and dear to our hearts, COVID. No, really, we're here to talk about the impacts of COVID on commercial real estate and what, maybe some positive things that have come out of the COVID pandemic will be bringing to us in the future. My day job, as you can see on the screen behind me, is I'm a lawyer at Carencross and Hempelman. My biggest volunteer commitment right now is that I'm president-elect for NAIOP's Washington chapter, and NAIOP is the Commercial Real Estate Association across the country. And in that role, I've really seen both in my private legal practice as well as in that volunteer role, I've really seen some changes over the past 18 to, I guess it's 18 months. We should know that by now, right? And high among them, are changing how, who, and where, what's getting built. Obviously, residential is huge, as is industrial. Office has somewhat declined. And I'm really excited to hear what our panel has to say today about their role in the commercial real estate industry in our region, and what they've seen in terms of what's happened, what the impacts are, and what they forecast will be happening in the future as we move forward. So with that, I will introduce our panelists to you. We'll just introduce all three of them, and then we'll move into some questions for each of them. First among our panelists is Jebediah Gardner. He is an African-American and Mexican-American businessman and multifamily real estate developer. He's the founder and CEO of Gardner Global. And he's built up a client base of private and nonprofit clients in the real estate development space, providing feasibility, pre-development, and development services. Additionally, Gardner Global currently has land under contract in the city of Seattle with hundreds of millions of dollars of future development opportunity that is expected to yield over 600 units of future market rate, workforce, and affordable housing, something our region, I think, sorely needs. Fun fact, at least fun to me, is that he's also a lawyer. He's a graduate of the Western Michigan Law School. Our second panelist today is Ashley Lippitt. Ashley is a senior vice president at CBRE, where she manages CBRE's relationship with flex provider Industrious. And in case you don't know that, CBRE is the minority owner of Industrious. Prior to her current role, Ashley worked on CBRE's flex offering, Hannah, now called Hannah by Industrious, and helped develop Host, CBRE's experience services and technology platform. In addition to developing new products and services, Ashley's background is in management consulting across industries, and she started her career as a high school teacher in West Philadelphia with Teach for America, which is her fun fact for the day. And our final, certainly not last but not least, but our final panelist I'll be introducing today is Chris Ritchie Curtis. She's a consultant and brokerage, provides consultant and brokerage services with JLL. She's been active in the commercial real estate and Seattle business community for over 18 years. Chris enjoys the full spectrum of real estate process, starting with upfront strategic planning to understanding her clients' business goals, which obviously then can help and best inform which real estate solutions will best support the business organization. She's developed long-standing relationships with her clients, as well as with members of the community, and is involved with the Seattle Chamber. Thanks to this chamber today for hosting the event, Mary's Place, Downtown Seattle Association, and Path's Global Health Heroes Committee. And fun fact for Chris is that she began her career as a research scientist in the UK after graduating from the University of Colorado. So with that, I will turn, having introduced each one individually, I'm going to turn to our panelists and ask them to each describe how their organization, their company, fits into the commercial real estate ecosystem. And I think I'll start with Chris.
Thanks, Nancy. So Jones Lang LaSalle, or JLL, is a global real estate company or a public organization, and we're really involved with advising clients on the full spectrum of the real estate life cycle. So everything from development to build to lease, property manage, sell, transact. So the full spectrum we're involved in. In the Seattle office, we have our main business lines are landlord representation, so representing landlords as they try to lease and sell buildings, tenant representation, which is the team that I lead, and then we also have project management and some other service lines, including property management. So really a full service company and also a leader in technology that hopefully we will hit on a little bit as that relates to some of the advances that have been in response to COVID.
Terrific. And Jebediah, can you provide us a description of your organization and how you're fitting into the ecosystem.
Hello, good afternoon. Well, good morning, actually, still morning here. Jebediah Gardner, I'm the founder and CEO of Gardner Global. We're a real estate investment and development company headquartered here in Seattle, Washington. Been around for about 12 and a half years. Actually, it'll be 13 next March. We'll also provide full service real estate services, which means we heavy property management, and we have a small brokerage team as well. Super involved in the community, and our mission is to build wealth. Yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Terrific. And then turning, of course, to Ashley.
Yep. Thanks for having me. And I would kind of say, listen to everything that Chris said and say that's a lot of what CBRE is and does. We are friends and competitors with JLL. So CB Richard Ellis, we are the world's largest commercial real estate organization. We serve across the whole broad spectrum of commercial real estate services, in addition to property management and project management and transactions, advisory and transactions, consulting. We have a large workplace consulting team, and as well as an agile consulting practice, which is really, really great and helpful because a big part of what we've seen over the last number of years, but also number of months, is that agile consulting group and agile kind of advisory group has been a great resource for our clients who are really thinking about what is the best provider for them and what it looks like to find a balance of kind of traditional commercial real estate and flexible commercial real estate, and how do they really weigh the different competitors and options, et cetera. So that's a big part of what we do. Additionally, we have our investment group, which includes CBRE Global Investors, which is and Trammell Crow Company, which are wholly owned subsidiaries. Hana, which was our flexible real estate company, which was acquired by Industrious in our investment, was also part of that group. So Hana was a WeWork or Industrious competitor, and now Industrious has Hana by Industrious. Excuse me. The joys of working at home. And my job is to manage that relationship. So excited to be here and talk about all that we're seeing in that arena, as well as the technology advances as well.
Terrific. Thank you. And thanks for the sound effects of the dog too. Just remind us all.
That's right.
So what I really want to turn to the heart of the matter and how this event was advertised. What impacts has your company seen over the last year and a half due to COVID? And I think I'm going to go backwards this time. So I'll start with Ashley.
Yeah, it's really interesting being a commercial real estate company because we're really thinking about ourselves both as the employer of CBRE folks ourselves, and what that means for us in terms of our own offices and how people show up at work for us, but then also how we're advising our clients. I think like everyone else, we've really been thinking through what exactly it means to do the work, and how we can really support our own employees who themselves have been largely home, though we've opened up our offices with distancing and masks and now with vaccines for the last number of months, which has been really great. I'd say that we've been really trying to balance how we can ourselves kind of eat our own dog food. So what does it mean to think about creating a healthy, happy workplace, and really be the big believers in commercial real estate that we are, while we have our own employees at home, because we strongly believe that commercial real estate is not going anywhere. It looks different, but that it's a huge opportunity for experts like us to step in and advise our clients on the best way to support people who are coming to work in new and different ways. So whether that means hybrid work environments that include traditional real estate and flex, whether that means advising them on sublease of their own space, and some of the favorable terms that they can get there potentially, or whether that means advising them on the different ways that people work and the technologies that need to be in place to have a seamless cross workday experience. So we've been doing that internally ourselves and really thinking about how we support our own employees. And of course, we had to do a lot of work at the beginning of COVID as well. We needed to make sure that all of our technology suite was up to snuff, and making sure that we were consistently across one virtual platform. We used our own tools, including Host, to make sure that when we were coming back to the office, we were doing our daily health checks. So the same services that we were providing externally, Host is our mobile application that people use when they come into the workplace to book their rooms and their desks and make sure that they have, service requests and concierge, et cetera. And so we really tailored that for our own offices, which was really, really great for us to be able to use that technology. But also we had to make sure that we were doing the nuts and bolts, which really mattered, ensuring that our cleaning was exactly what it needed to be, and property management was as tied in to all of the kind of health needs that we needed to make sure were in place. So I think that we've seen a lot of awareness across our organization with how we support our external clients, because our own employees are really seeing that in practice day to day as they're in a hybrid work environment.
Great, thanks. And Jebediah, how does your experience square with that? What kind of impacts has your company seen over the last year and a half associated with COVID?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been a little bit, or a lot of bit of a roller coaster for us. When COVID first hit for everybody, everything just came to a halt. So, we're, under contract to purchase a lot of land in Seattle, and we're very in touch with the private equity markets, and that all came to a halt, a screeching halt. And then it kind of came back. And so it's been a very interesting perspective to really kind of ebb and flow with the private capital markets, essentially, who are, investors in multifamily. So we're multifamily developers. We focus on affordable market rate and workforce housing here in Seattle. But thankfully, we're in a pretty resilient market in comparison to a lot of places around the country. And so there's a lot of eagerness that has kind of arose. So a lot of capital that was on the sideline is now eager to kind of get back into the game. So it's been really interesting to kind of watch how money is moving now. Interest rates are where they need to be for capital to move as well. And then, that also has created some interesting perspectives on how we view and work our performance and our operating budgets. So we're constantly chiseling away at how the rents have affected and how operations, expenses have been affected during this time. And so having to balance all that in a pro forma and a budget and a spreadsheet, it's added a little bit of a complicated layer, because now it's kind of like chasing a ghost, so to speak. It's like, well, where are things going? And now we got 2 new variants out there. And so it's constantly keeping us on our toes. But, at the end of the day, we stay creative, we stay optimistic, and we stay focused on our mission, which is to make sure projects work to create wealth for those who've been traditionally excluded from it. So that's a little bit of how it's kind of affected us during COVID. And then obviously in office as a practice, as a team, I decided to go to 4-day work weeks and to try that out and experiment to see how that would produce or create more productivity with my staff. Because people, we've gone through a lot. I would say every single person who's gone through COVID has to deal with a lot. And so I wanted to give people an extra day to kind of deal with life and be able to come back to work focused. And that has proved very, very fruitful for our organization.
Great. I think I'm going to come back to some of those concepts in a minute. But right now, I want to turn over to Chris and hear how your company's been impacted over the last year and a half.
So, obviously all of the people have been impacted. We've never spent so much time in our seats and in front of a screen. It's a people-oriented business, and we're usually out touring and connecting with clients and engaging in person. And so that's obviously very different, and it's hard to collaborate from your desk at home. But really what's transformed for our company, I was just going to sort of speak to what I've seen in the market over the last 18 months, because our job is to track the trends, follow the data, understand what's going on in the market, try to figure out what all the different companies are doing, and then ultimately advise our clients. And I feel like we've had whiplash so many times in the last 18 months. It was like when COVID hit, everything came to a screeching halt. And, almost all transactions that were in play just stopped. Companies stopped touring. They didn't know if they should make long-term real estate decisions. There were a lot of younger, earlier stage companies that said, maybe we'll just go virtual. We should try to shut all of our space. Everybody's going to work remotely for the rest of their lives. And it was just this, kind of panic and pretty extreme thinking. And that lasted for, maybe a good 6 months. And I think there was so much confusion with, government regulations and what you're hearing in the press that companies just didn't want to make a plan. They kept looking to Microsoft and Amazon and thinking like, okay, the large employers are going to do this right. There's no template. There's no guideline for this. We're all going through it for the first time. So we're just going to wait and see what the smartest people do. And we'll just follow that. And so people were kind of waiting, and the market was getting, we kind of shifted from pre-COVID. It was a landlord's market. We were really resilient. Seattle was in a really strong position. And I would say we were more resilient than most because we had such a strong tech base. We have strong biotech, which didn't skip a beat throughout all of COVID. They've been more active than ever. And, a lot of big healthcare organizations. So we still had a strong base, but generally the market was too much product, not enough demand all the way through the end of 2020. And then as we came into the first and second quarter, with the hope that the vaccine was coming, things started to pick up again and there was more hope. And when the vaccine started to get more widely distributed within the population, companies started to enter the market again. And it was like this whiplash of all this pent up demand. There was suddenly certainty, hope. They were starting to hit their reentry dates. Okay, we're going to come back to the office starting in June. Everybody will be back in after Labor Day. This is great. This is over. Which it was good for the real estate market, but it was also suddenly all of your clients think that they're going to get these great COVID deals, but suddenly they're competing against other tenants in the market trying to get this great space that they think they're going to get at a 50% discount because their friend just leased some, sublease from, a big company that was given a 60% discount. So there was just a lot of confusion as to where is the market? What kind of deal can I get? And then here we are after Labor Day. And a bunch of companies aren't re-entering the office. People are starting to kind of kick that can down the road. We're starting to see a little more uncertainty. I think the good news is this wave isn't going to be quite as bad from halting the market. I think that just everybody's pausing, and I'm sure we'll get into the actual workplace strategies and the different things that people are going to implement as they actually do return to the office, because there's a lot of different things being talked about. But it's just been pretty remarkable. I've never seen in the course of a year and a half or even shorter, so many dramatic shifts in the market and companies going through things they've never had to face. And so we're all trying to figure it out on the fly, and you can't read a book about it, and everybody's sort of looking to their peers. So we've done a lot of trying to build relationships between different organizations and create peer-to-peer workshops so people can just, brainstorm and share information so that we can kind of try to learn how to do this together, because it's definitely uncharted territory.
Absolutely. So how, let's turn to a little bit more specifics and kind of build on some of the things we've touched on so far. Are there technologies you've been able to utilize in new ways during this time? Are there pivots or adjustments to your practices that have arisen and been helpful to you? And I think I'll start this time with Jebediah.
Actually, Nancy, can you repeat
Yeah.
the question? My internet went down. I didn't get to hear the whole question.
Absolutely. Really turning to thinking about how you have seen your practices pivot or adjust during COVID, and whether you've been able to utilize technology in any kind of new way during this time, and just talk about those sorts of features and factors that COVID has driven for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's been interesting because we're a small shop, right? I got about maybe 10 or 11 people on our team. We don't have thousands of employees spread across the country or world. And so for us, we had to keep pumping, we had to keep churning, we had to keep working. And so, office is small enough to where I was still coming in every day during COVID. And allowing my team members to work from home, or switching days where they would come in the office and I'd work from home. And then, making sure everyone has been safe vaccinated and practicing safe distancing and everything that goes along with it, because we're a small team. So if one person goes down, chances are, Gardner Global and Jebediah will go down. So our margin of error is very slim as a small business. And so we make sure that, we got hand sanitizer at the door. We get hand sanitizer actually on every desk in the office. Little things like that, just to make sure that we're all practicing, safe COVID, measures. But in general, as far as a work perspective, like I mentioned early, I wanted to test out the 4-day work week. And that was something that I found out was happening in Europe, namely in Finland. And I wanted to test it out and give people an opportunity to take an extra day off. I mean, we all have gone, like I said before, gone through a lot. And in addition to just life in general, and then we have COVID on top. And so I wanted to make sure that folks, when they came in the office, that they were focused and were able to use that extra day to take care of what they needed to take care of to be productive. And it turned out for us, again, we're a small team. It worked out really well. And in actuality, the reality of it is my team members don't even actually use that day. It's pretty interesting. So Wednesday is what we call a flex day at the Gardner Global office, which means if you're a staff member, you have the opportunity to flex. You can say, hey, I'm going to take this day off, like giving you a heads up, or you can say, I'm going to continue to work. And so a lot of folks just work through it, which has been interesting. And then every once in a while, they'll use the opportunity to take the day off. So I think once you give people the option and they know that they have the flexibility, if it's there, it somehow creates some like further productivity. And so we've been very fortunate to see some pretty good yields from our staff members, and I've heard good things from it as well. So that's one thing that we've been really focused on is mental health. Essentially, is what it boils down to for us. And so I want to make sure that if I have the ability as a CEO to take any day off I want my team members to understand that they can also have that flexibility as well. So that's worked pretty well for us. Again, we're in Post Alley in Pike Place Market, and so we're kind of hidden away from a lot of the traditional real estate offices on the frontage of a street or kind of high up in the building. And so this is our little bat cave, and so we come here and we just work. And so for us, we've been just very focused on making sure that our mental health is good, take days off when needed. But when we come to work, we work really, really hard. And so that's kind of one of the things that we've been up to.
Thanks. Ashley, got people moving to 4-day work weeks in your organization or your clients?
Jebediah, that's awesome to hear. And I would say, it's one of the things that's so interesting that you mentioned and Chris mentioned is the way that you have looked to other countries, other organizations outside of industry and globally to really understand what are best practices and what are people doing. I think one thing that's so interesting is that this is really the first time that one of the practices that's really changed is that organizations have had to open up their lens. So as Chris was mentioning, we are in a region where all eyes were on Seattle and the Bay Area. And a little bit on LA and some other places, but really, truly, globally, whether you were in, Detroit, Michigan, or whether you were in London, a lot of organizations, or Dubai, or even Singapore to some extent, a lot of organizations were saying, what are the big tech firms based in the US? What are they doing? They're going to figure it out. And then regionally, their practices are going to change. But I think what's so interesting is that even with that, you still have city by city, region by region policies. So CBRE made the decision that we were going to go with CDC and local recommendations. And a lot of our client organizations made that same decision. What's also interesting is in the same way that Chris's team, was advising those larger organizations, when we're advising a lot of those larger organizations or working with them, they're just figuring it out themselves. It's been so unprecedented. And so a big shift that has occurred in terms of practices is commercial real estate has taken on a higher profile in organizations at the C-suite in a way that it never had prior. I mean, certainly you'd seen pockets of C-level executives really being involved and certainly having awareness of commercial real estate. But I'd say the day-to-day practice gained such traction at the C-suite level, at the highest level, that all of the conversations were really had different engagement, different visibility. The practice looked a little bit different at, the most executive level in ways that it hadn't necessarily before. And I would say that as our as we've been working with our partners, we are seeing, more and more human capital and human resources and chief people officers being involved in real estate decisions in ways that they hadn't before, because of that need to understand, health and wellness and employee retention. I think that's the other thing that has been really interesting and surprising, is that there's been such at the world's largest organizations and at some of the other, not the largest organizations, at startups, et cetera, we've seen such a shift in people changing jobs in ways that I think that we were surprised by, right? Like, a lot of folks thought, hey, people are going to get scared. They're going to just cling to their jobs in ways that they hadn't, because they didn't want to be worried about being out of employment during this pandemic. And what we've seen, in fact, it was such an opportunity for people to say, well, if I'm working remotely, where do I want to be? Because if I have the opportunity to shift, because if I'm not tethered, what would that look like? And so I think we've seen a lot of that, and the practices surrounding that have also really surprised us. Internally, in terms of our transactions and our brokerage practices, we've also deployed technologies. To your question, Nancy, we've done virtual tours, we've done FaceTime tours, we've done all kinds of different. We've deployed lots of different technologies to make it safe and easy for our transactions professionals to give some of that face time that Chris was talking about to others who can't be there in person. And a lot of our transactions professionals came into office as soon as they were allowed to. So as soon as the earliest time that the regulator said, hey, it's safe to come in and be distanced, we certainly did that. So I think that those trends are really important, and the practices that we take around them are also have been eye-opening for all of us, certainly.
Yeah, great. Chris, what do you have to add there?
Well, I agree with everything that Ashley said. We've experienced a lot of that too. I think in terms of transformation, I think our industry's been doing the typical brokerage process sort of the same way for decades and decades. And it was time for innovation and change. And I think that, we're a technology-based organization. We develop a lot of technology, we invest in a lot of technology, but COVID forced every single professional to really embrace it and adopt it. And all of our clients, we just had to use technology. Ashley had mentioned virtual tours. We have this, we have a lot of clients that will fly into town to tour properties and get an understanding of the region. They may be looking at different sites for a particular requirement. And now we have this 3D visualization tool that will allow you to kind of fly over the region, look at transportation, where, college educated people live, and just all of these different layers of demographic data, as well as zoom over to a building, see the views, see the street view, go into the space, walk the space. So really get almost more information than you would driving around the city in a car, and certainly a lot quicker. And you don't have to get on a plane. So it's a lot, the carbon footprint's better, and it saves a lot of time. So I'm hoping that's something that we carry forward out of COVID. I know people love to connect in person, but think of how much time you spend saving on these market tours. And it also allows us to go through the process quicker. So clients have, when they have a really urgent need to go through the tours and get everybody's calendars on the kind of aligned, being able to go through this with technology and even understanding some of the upfront programming needs. We had developed all sorts of different space programming calculators when COVID was kind of at its worst. We would help people understand, if you're in a 100,000 square foot footprint, but you want all your employees to have 6 foot spacing. This is kind of as they were visualizing reentry. If everybody's at 6 foot spacing, and then you assume 50% of your workforce is going to work remotely, and 30% is going to come in half the time, and then another percentage is actually going to be there. How much space do you now need? Because they're thinking, could we shed any space? Because now we're trying to save money, or they may actually have to expand and get more space if they're trying to space out and they want all of their people to come in and have a workstation. So there were just a lot of different tools and technologies that we needed to use to sort of guide and consult on what is the right strategy. And then also, as companies were thinking about having people back in the space, it's one thing to say everybody can come in 2 or 3 times a week, you choose. But then how does that functionally happen? Like if I want to come in and interact with my 5 team members and I pick Monday and they pick Tuesday, I mean, we're not there at the same time. How do we know which room to get? How do I know what desk to go to? And so we've been developing all of this technology to help support what would be a completely different way of working. I mean, some companies do some form of hybrid now, where consultants oftentimes work not 5 days a week in the office, but the kinds of transformations we've been talking about really does need to be driven by technology. Otherwise, I think there'll be a rude awakening when we get to the office and you can't find your team and you can't, interact as well as you'd hope. So I think it is transforming. I think we've got a long way to go. There's going to be a lot of trial and error when people do get back to the office. I think there's kind of how we think everybody will be behaving. And there's probably going to be a year period where we have to kind of play with some things, tweak things, and then there will be yet another iteration of what kind of the perfect workplace strategy of the future looks like kind of in this post-COVID world.
A year. Wow.
I shouldn't even said noted a time.
Who knows? I just know from my own organization, we were doing the, back to work soft opening through the end of September. Well, now we've booted that to the end of December, where we're hopefully going to be able to set some rules. And now we're here a year. Well, anyway, we'll figure it out. We always will. Right? So we've already started to march in and start talking about the kinds of strategies that really were driven by COVID times, but that we anticipate seeing continuing into the future. And I'd really like to hear from all of you what kind of opportunities you see for the commercial real estate sector to change, hopefully for the good, based on this crazy pandemic we were all suffering and stuck with and had to deal with. Any volunteers to go first? Pick some. Jebediah, you get the biggest smile right now. So there, you go first.
Sure. Opportunities. Well, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner. So when chaos arises, the first thing I'm thinking about is opportunity. And so, as we kind of, we're framing this around COVID times, but we really got hit with 2 situations: COVID times, and then we'll call it the social awakening time. Right. And so during COVID, there was a huge upheaval socially in America that also was running in parallel with COVID. And so, being who I am, a Black Mexican, business owner, I have to take into consideration of both of those real life factors, because they impacted me quite dramatically and my business. And so, as I'm thinking about opportunities in the real estate space, I focus on multifamily. Right. And so, knowing that there's social upheaval, knowing that there's a virus that is extremely dangerous, how do I still maintain the path of acquiring real estate, involving those who traditionally would never get the investment opportunity to invest, and also design a building that's responsive to the community? How do we do all those things? And so that provides the opportunity, right? In there lies the opportunity. And so it's reaching out to folks who were on the sidelines, who were timid about getting in the space, who are now ready to get into the space, right? And by that, I mean, we came in contact with tons of, the term is BIPOC these days, but we'll say Black and brown folks who have been really interested in investing in real estate, but just didn't have an access point. And so the social upheaval and the COVID situation has created a real, I would say, amongst the millennial generation, a real kind of not angst, but very much momentum and kind of a forced path of like, we're literally, our generations got smashed. We got the 2007 and 8 recession. Now we got, we got the 2001 bubble recession, the 2008 and 9 recession, and now we got COVID, where's the opportunity to create wealth for our generation? Where's it at? And so folks are looking at our direction because we're in the space. And so they're like, well, you're buying real estate. How do we also do that or get involved? And so therein lies the opportunity of a tremendous amount of untapped resource. People forget that Black and brown people per capita spend the most money per year. We are not actually a broke community. It's just our spending habits. And so when you look at reversing that mindset and starting to train people to think about don't spend but invest, then all of a sudden you've opened a door for a lot of capital to come your way. And so therein lies the opportunity. And to be able to purchase real estate in the central district of Seattle, which used to be primarily African-American, and be backed by Black and brown investors, along with anchored with, white investors, is truly like something that I think potentially wouldn't have happened if COVID and social unrest didn't kind of smash together. And so we're looking at really, really innovative ways to bring people on board to invest in our projects for the long term. And it also is created in the seller's market as well. We've gotten bombarded with phone calls of people who are now interested in selling to us specifically because they want to maintain the real estate in the Black community. This has not happened before, right? So you got a lot of movement and a lot of kind of, I would say, churning, a lot of butter churning in the underbelly of Seattle, of people really wanting to be active. And so they see themselves being investors and or helping by offloading and disposing of their asset to folks who are from the community. And so it's been a very interesting experience for us from that perspective. And so the phone calls that we typically would never get, we're getting now. And so it's just taking advantage of that. And then the other thing is more specifically real estate related is it really changed our lens on how we view the retail commercial space, because as we look to develop our buildings, it's, COVID pretty much dismantled a lot of small businesses. And so it's like, are we really building out, big box commercial space in our mixed use buildings? Maybe not. Maybe we're looking at live work lofts or work live lofts for artists and local micropreneurs, where we can activate the spaces with them and not kind of anchor our building with commercial and retail rent. So COVID has really kind of shifted our perspective on that, on how we kind of perceive how to activate and program our building, so to speak. And then secondly, I would say this is the perfect time to innovate. This is the perfect time to try something new. Like Chris and Ashley were saying, this is the time to go out there. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if it does work, guess what? You might have found something that can really create some additional margin to your bottom line, and also potentially help your staff, your coworkers, or the people that you're serving, your client base. So this is an opportunity for technology to really kind of be played with, and also an opportunity for folks to to open that door and see who comes in. And so that's a little bit about my perspective on the opportunity. And then just kind of macro level from a market perspective, tracking the feds and what they're doing with interest rates and how they're keeping things low for a little bit, but plan on raising that in the next couple of years. This is literally the time for younger folks of the millennial generation to really, really take risks, but to be responsible financially. And so, our mission is to build wealth. We always hashtag let's build wealth. So this is the time for our generation to get their credit scores right, pay their bills on time, and get access to that cheap loans for housing, get access to small business loans. This is the time where we really got to step up and do that. So that's kind of my perspective on that.
Ashley, have you seen a similar confluence of the COVID and social unrest creating opportunities in the office sort of side of things and in the workplace side?
Yeah, I love everything that Jebediah just mentioned there, because I think that it's both global and local, and that feels like a very important perspective to have at this time. Meaning, it can feel overwhelming when there's this global pandemic, global unrest, et cetera. And yet also, what are the things that we can control in our daily lives, or that we can influence in our daily lives? And certainly CBRE has taken that perspective. We established a diversity and inclusion, a different kind of diversity and inclusion program. We established a new C-suite role around that. We had diversity and inclusion, but we elevated that role and that team and expanded very rapidly. I think that there's a lot to be done in trying to figure out how to support, understand, dismantle, really figure out what the role of the larger organization is in this, in this shifting social, unrest, and proactively addressing a lot of what Jebediah mentioned. And how do you do that when your headquarters is in Dallas, Texas, and yet you have 110,000 folks supporting clients globally? And there are lots of ways. And so we need to do those things. And that's really where I think that our team has really shifted an emphasis and really, decided to move forward in programmatically addressing those challenges. I'd say the other thing that's really interesting is, there are enough headlines around the fact that, the New York Times might say, sorry, I'm going to let Chris go. I have a crying child here in the room.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I was actually going to say. And I have my father-in-law. There's a lot of headlines saying the parents aren't all right. And I think that that's been a huge social shift right now that we've seen, that women and mothers have been disproportionately affected, and the mental health of women and mothers in the workplace really needs to be better understood and supported. And that feels pretty essential. And I think that there are lots of different ways on the commercial real estate side that we can think through that, including CBRE's bet in flex real estate. So we really made this investment in Industrious because we believe that there's a huge opportunity to really advise our clients on different ways to enable success for people coming to the office. We believe that there's an opportunity and that the office is a place that people want to be, that face-to-face work is not going anywhere, especially for rising generations of leaders, especially for underrepresented communities, whether that's BIPOC folks, or whether it's women who wouldn't otherwise have the face time that they might still historically need to be able to, grow their profile. And so how do you do that, but also support a balance of people who need to work from home for 3 days a week? I think we've often seen that kind of flexibility as a give, and folks have felt maybe tethered to a job that they didn't want to keep because they felt like they got flexibility, so they can't leave that. Now, commercial real estate, in a surprising way, has the opportunity to step in and say, hey, listen, we can do things differently and we can lead. And I think
That's great. And thanks to your father-in-law too for helping.
I'm so
you.
sorry for my sound machine, for the sound effects in the background. I'm still living that COVID life, it appears.
Chris, I'm sure you have more to say about the opportunities you see for commercial real estate coming out of the pandemic and social unrest as well. So
Yeah, and my mind's kind of spinning listening to Jebediah and Ashley. There's so many different themes and things to touch on, and there's just a lot here. But I think it kind of just boils down to, it seems like throughout COVID, there's just been this rise or emphasis on the human aspects of all of this, whether it's the humans at our companies. We also have over the last year and a half done a lot more on diversity and inclusion, investing in people. And I mean, we've always wanted to create diverse teams, and especially as our industry advances, we just need more diverse minds at the table. It's better for our clients, it's better for our work. And so that's been a huge focus, and long overdue. And then on the client side, so 20 years ago, real estate was sort of, okay, how many square feet and what does it cost? How many people can we jam into the space so we can look at the lowest cost per person? It was about density, and it was just a commodity. It was like a sea of, cubicles in an area, and it wasn't very inspiring, but people could get the work done, and that's kind of what you were used to. And now you fast forward to today, and you look at these companies tackled with this really, really complex problem of how do we motivate the workforce back to the office? They've gotten comfortable being at home. They've enjoyed being around their kids more. They don't have to commute. They've kind of made it work. It was hard going into it, but now people are used to it and they're saying, I'm not sure I want to go back to a 5-day work week. And you know what, company A, if you can't provide me with what I want, I can go to company B, C, or D. I mean, we're in this tech-rich region and there's still a really fierce competition for talent. And so companies are having to rethink the way they motivate and pull their employees back. And I feel like we've kind of started to transform, do we have one location or do we have multiple locations, and get people closer to their homes so they don't have to commute? What does the workspace look like when they get to the office, and how many times a week should we even ask them to come into the office? I mean, companies are really thinking a lot harder about all of these human related questions than they ever have, which is fun to be kind of at the table, because these are big business issues that do have a real estate solution. And so, forget a transaction or a lease or a purchase or a sale. We're just trying to figure out how does your workplace work for your people, because that's the most important part of this. And if we can't get everybody back to the office and collaborating, or back to the office some of the time and collaborating, it's going to be really hard to continue to be productive and continue to grow these awesome companies that we have in the Pacific Northwest and around the world. So I just love the conversations that are happening. I don't think we have all the answers yet. I think we still have a lot more to learn, but without a doubt, we're going to come out of COVID, kind of rethinking the way we support the people in real estate and not just thinking of it as like bricks and mortar.
That's great. I'm going to turn to one of the audience questions. I think we actually only have one, and I should reiterate for the audience, you're welcome to put those into the Q&A. This was more directed at Jebediah and follow up to one of your comments earlier, although obviously Ashley or Chris, if you have input, I'd love to hear it. And that is the question of whether or not the city of Seattle has been showing you flexibility about waiving existing requirements for street level retail.
You see my face. Very, very interesting question. Thank you for asking. We're going to find out. We're going to need departures. Currently, right now, I believe the city of Seattle and our NC zones require at least 50% of the retail or the first level space to be commercial. And I'm trying to eliminate that to potentially 20%, 25 maybe. So, but we need to ask for departure. And so that's going to be a framed and very strategic ask from us. And we hope the city gets it. One of the things that I'm hoping for the new leadership when that happens at the mayoral level, that they understand that to Chris's point, they kind of, people just view real estate as this thing that just happens, and it actually doesn't happen without tons of people involved. And that often requires creative thinking. And if we continue to stick to very specific age-old design guidelines and age-old, requirements that the city has rested on for so long, we're never going to see our city become a tier 1 city as the potential that it could be, because we need people at that level in our governmental municipalities to be able to think creatively, to allow Chris and the Ashleys and the Jebediahs and other developers to be able to see things differently, to give people, give the market what it's actually needing and actually asking for versus pigeonholing. So we're looking forward to partnering with the city under the new leadership, and hopefully it's something that they understand, because that won't be the only thing we'll be asking for. We'll be asking them to look at things a lot differently as we move forward.
Chris or Ashley, more to add on that point? Okay. I know as a land use attorney, I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I'm just the moderator. Pretty much share Jebediah's views there. So what about, let's talk about a little bit about forecasting. How do you anticipate the recovery to look like? I mean, we've thrown out some time frames a little bit here and there, but what do you just choose like September 2023? What do things look like?
Previously, this is just the office market that I'm speaking to specifically, but this time last year, we were expecting fourth quarter of last year to be sort of the bottom. And that in the springtime, we would start to see recovery and, we had sort of base case optimistic and pessimistic as to how quickly it'd recover. But we were really tying the vaccine to recovery, meaning people are more comfortable moving forward with long-term real estate decision-making, signing leases, moving people back in, the reentry dates, all of that. The variant's thrown us off a little bit. I think we generally, we don't expect the same impact as we saw last year. But it's a little bit it's crystal ball. Like we don't exactly know the impact of this. We don't know how quickly maybe the third booster shots will then give us a resurged sense of, safety and optimism and okay, let's get back to the office. So, the one thing that I would say for the Seattle market, I think we came into this in a really resilient position. We've seen job growth continue. We've seen companies continue to expand, like some of our larger, tech companies, healthcare companies, biotech companies been absolutely on fire and putting a lot of pressure on the product in the region. And so, generally we're feeling really good about our recovery. Trying to pinpoint it to an exact quarter, I think would be tough, but barring more dramatic variants, I think we're on the slow road to recovery. And hopefully, like we've seen with the whiplash over the last year and a half, a third shot and a huge decrease in hospitalizations and all of that, I think the market will quickly react. I think people want to go back. We want to return to normal. We want to have this behind us. So I think people are ready for that. So I think it'll happen quickly once there's just a little more certainty and, feeling of safety.
I would just add to that I think in the vacuum that's been created, in the kind of crystal ball vacuum, I hope that we are underneath all the technologies and the feedback and et cetera is an opportunity to integrate data in different ways than we ever have before. So thinking through actually making more data-driven decisions versus, more informed decisions versus guesses. And I think certainly we're going to still be guessing, but we're hopefully going to be minimizing the risk around those guesses. And my belief is that come 2023, we'll be thinking about different kinds of data points, not just, utilization. We'll be thinking about, understanding, more of our labor analytics, drive distances, proximity to flexible hubs, for example. What would it look like for us to have more hub and spoke models in this region where you might have smaller offices and more flex locations on the spoke. And then you have people who are inclined to go to those flex locations because they're working with other tech folks. They're kind of in these hubs or in those spokes where other people want to be, or with other affinity groups because they have the opportunity to feel nurtured and to support their other endeavors in ways that in this region in particular is particularly important. So I'd say that that's something that we will probably see more of in the next year as people want to come back to the workplace, but for very different reasons. Or some of the same reasons, but for maybe a more diverse set of reasons.
I was just Googling what does Seattle look like in 2 years, seeing if it can give me that crystal ball answer. No, just joking. Similar to Chris's comment, like it's tough to pinpoint where things are going to be, but kind of holistically, just speaking to our market, I look at the $300-400 million on the waterfront redevelopment. I look at the LID I-5. I look at the $1.5 billion being spent on the convention center. Those are really, really large scale projects for our city specifically. And I feel like that's going to help drive A, workforce, B, tourism, and C, livability. People are going to want to live near all those things. So, in my developer optimistic mind, I'm looking at Seattle to be, in a solid position, at least in 2 years. Because in 2 years, I think the Bellevue light rail, I forgot about the light rail, forgot to mention transit. The light rail is going to be done supposedly going to the east side. So what does that do to our markets as far as creating access from those from the east side to come to Seattle and vice versa, right? So I feel like we as a region are positioned to be in a very strong position globally to compete. That all of that also helps inform what we think about rents and inflation and also escalation, AMI escalation rates. So for us, we remain optimistic. But again, I go back to this is a good time and opportunity to create that access, real access for people. So we're focusing on creating vehicles that allow people to invest in real estate and not just be the end user, not just be the renter. And so that's what we're going to focus on. So ideally in 2023, we have a really great pocket of people who've seen a little bit of their wealth portfolio take a leap because they've been involved in our projects. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say about that.
Well, we're getting kind of close to time, so I just want to give each of you an opportunity to make any closing remarks, or if I fail to ask the question, then you have something you really want to say, give you that opportunity to say that, and then I'll wrap things up. So I guess we'll start with Ashley.
I was hoping you would go to all the other folks, because every time they've said something, it's really inspired me. But I think Seattle and the Puget Sound region have just been, as Chris and Jebediah have said, have been so well positioned, have weathered various storms, and I actually think that this is a case where the resilience of the region is going to look different, in the sense that it's not even necessarily a bounce back. It's been it's a slowing of the curve that then will continue to skyrocket. I think it's just really interesting because in so many ways the rest of the global community kind of seeing a decrease in people going to the workplace has just drawn people to the Seattle region, because they're residentially, despite the fact that residential real estate has continued to be even more and more expensive. And I think that it just shows us that we need to be more proactive in bringing, as Jebediah says, the right opportunities to lots of different folks, but also really being intentional in how we are supporting workers in a kind of global community here, because I think that we are going to see more folks from outside Seattle coming to Seattle. We really need to think about maintaining the local community, and thinking about evolving opportunities for those who are from the region, but also being really clear about how Seattle itself has been changed by people coming into the area from different parts of the world and also neighboring states. And I think that it provides us a great opportunity to set the trends in commercial real estate and think about how we can draw from folks like Jebediah locally to also then bring companies like CBRE bring those lessons to other global communities or global parts of our community. So I think it's a really great thing to bring together groups of people like this internally in your own organization, but also to make sure that we're doing this across the region and learning from others, because there's lots of great connection making to be made and ways to expand opportunity to other regions as well.
Jebediah, anything in closing?
Go ahead, Chris. I saw you unmute. I think you have. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Wrap up. I would say, and this is just me going off the rails since we're almost done, is the city itself. We need a singular vision. There's so much polarization, and it's killing every aspect of our economy, from the lowest who don't have much to the folks who are wealthy, and there's no middle ground in between. That's like having us all work to build a singular vision, so that way we all know we're on the same page. And so that's been very frustrating to be in Seattle and to have people who believe the same things, right? We all believe that like everyone should have an opportunity to work, to live, to play, and to live affordably, but the approaches have been so polarized. So I would really love for us and folks on the call to think about how do we shape a singular vision that we all can get behind as a city, and really be able to march and fix some of these social issues. And then secondly, some things that we think about, I travel quite a bit internationally, and this concept of the 15-minute city that was brought up a couple of years ago, where you have everything you need within a 15 minutes radius of walking or biking. And that's something that I think the real estate, market, or the real estate leadership in Seattle, or even just, I would say, the region, should really be thinking about how do we curate spaces to where we're really thinking about walkability a lot more. And, because there's a whole network of rollerbladers and skateboarders and skaters who don't have space. And we don't really need cars in our urban cores. So that's just me kind of going off the rails. Hopefully that is useful to some folks.
Thanks. Chris?
Gosh, I feel like it's all been said, and I don't have anything new to say at this point, but I just think that having these types of conversations are really helpful. And we'd had discussions probably 6 months ago with different stakeholders in the city about how do we all rally around one big solution and try to help companies and their employees all work off the same assumptions and the same plans, because we're all trying to figure out what to do based on government guidelines, city guidelines, county guidelines, your own corporate guidelines, the decisions that you just make with your own internal management. And there's just, it's just really hard to follow. And I think if the region could come together and, whether it's like we're all going to celebrate on a particular reentry date, or we're all going to celebrate and work towards, something as we come out of COVID. I think there is a way to use this as kind of a uniting factor. I think employees are starting to kind of turn companies on each other too, as they compete for talent. So I just hope, my hope, I guess, is as we come out of all this, we are stronger and more collaborative as a region, because we've gone through a lot together, and hopefully we're pulling out of it. So just appreciate Chamber and the DSA and all these different organizations really trying to build these connections and networks so that we can continue to talk and learn from each other.
Great. Thank you so much. So I guess I would sum up by saying that, the big themes here are that commercial real estate isn't just an object. It wasn't before COVID and everything else that's happened in the last 18 months, but I think people have woken up a little bit more to the fact that it's really about servicing people in order to service companies to actually get things done. It's really focused about the people and less about an object. The second theme I think I heard was that data and technology and flexibility in the use of technology not only can make things easier and cheaper for the bosses and the investors, but it can also actually enhance opportunities for the BIPOC community and for women to provide that additional flexibility that you may need when you're not in a traditional 9-to-5, focused lifestyle kind of thing. And I guess the third thing I would note as a theme really comes out of what you were just saying, Chris, which is we need to look for unification. We are a very resilient commercial real estate market. That's a good thing. And hopefully we can help to use that. Hopefully we can use that resilience and our staying power to unify the community around getting back into our offices and rebuilding those ground floor retail spaces, or whatever they ultimately become that the city of Seattle lets you build, Gemini, to make sure that there's life on the streets and a vibrancy in our city isn't lost. So those are my thoughts. And I think that, is it Lee now or Becky who is going to come back on from the chamber?
Here, Betsy with the chamber. So thank you so much to the panel. So once again, want to thank Chris, Jebediah, Ashley, and of course, Nancy for this great discussion. And we're all in the virtual applause, so thank you so much. And then once again, just want to thank our sponsors of today's program, Business Health Trust and Advanced Professionals Insurance and Benefit Solutions, for sponsoring today's program. We do have the next executive speaker series on October 6th, which is on meetings and live events. So feel free to join that. And then we do also have another program this Friday, September 10th, if you're interested in learning more about other developments in other states and how it impacts the Pacific Northwest. We're having an Alaska Business Forum on building Alaska with the construction industry. So feel free to sign up for that as well on our events calendar. And with that, once again, thank you so much and all have a great day. Bye-bye.